Very good afternoon from the Platinum team. You are very welcome to our webinar, Creating Communities of Inquiry, focused on students with special needs and on mathematical modeling. My name is Maria Boyko and I will lead the webinar, presenting the speakers and managing the time. This is our third webinar and it's both an honor and a pleasure for us to organize such event and share with you results of the work of the Platinum team. We would like to offer you the speech-to-text function, so you can follow the written version of what the speakers say. If you are interested in this additional help, go to the Zoom menu at the bottom of your screen and you will find the closed caption button next to the record button. Then you activate the series and can follow the text that will be said by the speakers. And I would like to give the floor to Alexey Zhivtsov, the Vice Rector of Borys Grinchenko Kyiv University and one of the participants in the Platinum project. Alexey Zhivtsov is an associate professor, the author of more than 50 papers on the use of ICT in higher education.
Good afternoon, dear participants of the international conference that is held within the framework of the Platinum Project, dedicated to the teaching of mathematics to higher education students. We regret that the conference has to be held online and we could not meet at our university. However, we are sure that such format will not prevent us from having an interesting, professional and competent conversation about the problems of teaching mathematics, to exchange interesting achievements and results, to share an experience. The rectorate of the university wishes all participants of the conference fruitful cooperation, health, and we invite everyone to our university after the quarantine. Thanks for your attention.
Thank you very much. And I would like to introduce the next speaker. Yuri Rogovchenko is a professor of mathematics at the University of Agder and a coordinator of the Platinum Project. Yuri has a solid research reputation. He is a good manager and a source of inspiration for our Platinum team. Please, Yuri.
Thank you very much, Maria, for the introduction. So I guess those who already have attended our webinars, they can easily recognize me. And I will present again our team. As you see in the different colors, we are all different, but we are united with one idea, which is the inquiry in mathematics teaching and learning. We have partners across the European countries. We also have associated partners who joined us during this period. And you can see they are colored in three different groups. So we have partners in Australia and New Zealand. We have Ukrainian partners who will be presenting tomorrow. One of the presentations will be there by their team. And also we have colleagues in Spain. And we have, of course, strong support of our local Norwegian team, in particular Matrix, the Center for Research of Innovation and Coordination Mathematics Teaching. So they provide us very, very strong support. The webinar number 3 we have today and tomorrow has 3 main themes. The first one is communities of inquiry formed by university teachers of mathematics. The second is the design of inquiry tasks suitable for university students with special needs. And the third main theme is inquiry and mathematical modeling. So the first 2 will be dealt mostly today, but there will be also some instances tomorrow. Mathematical modeling will be featuring mainly tomorrow, but we have invited keynote presentation by Morten Blomhøy this afternoon also, which will link us to tomorrow's modeling theme. And this is the structure for today's work. So the program is organized in 3 blocks. It's very dense, and that's why we have very short breaks after the 3 presentations in the first block on the communities of inquiry. Then there will be immediately after the break, the questions and answer session. And it will be followed by the presentation on students with identified needs. Then again, we'll have a break and the questions and answers session after that. And the keynote speaker will be Morten Blomhøy, as I mentioned, and then the panel discussion and the closure. So you are very much welcome to ask questions to the presenters, to the panel speakers, and also you can provide your immediate feedback on the Padlet page. And please use just the proper column for your feedback. And also the link to the Padlet will be provided in the chat box. And now it's over to Maria.
Thank you, Yuri. The invited keynote speakers at our webinar made many important contributions to the development of mathematics education research. There are the speakers in the, these are the speakers in the first block, and it's honor for me to introduce Barbara Jaworski, a professor of mathematics education at Loughborough University, who is the academic leader of the Platinum Project. Professor Jaworski was the president of the International Group for the Psychology of Mathematics Education, president of the European Society for Research in Mathematics Education, and the editor-in-chief of the Journal of Mathematics Teacher Education. She authored many papers and participated in educational projects aimed at making mathematics teaching better. Please, Barbara.
Thank you, Maria. Okay, I hope everyone can hear me. It's my pleasure to start off our webinar in terms of its content, and I'm going to open the discussion, the focus on communities of inquiry for development of mathematics teaching and learning. This is a central part of our Platinum project. It, of course, relates to the fact that our inquiry model is the basis of all of our work within Platinum. But you see in our title that Platinum is a partnership for learning and teaching in university mathematics. So the idea of collaborative work with inquiry is central, and therefore communities of inquiry are one of the most important aspects of our Platinum project. So I'm going to start with addressing what we mean by a community. For a start, I'd like to mention that the idea of community of inquiry is linked in some ways to the idea of community of practice, which we read about mainly from Etienne Wenger. I don't have time here to talk about those links, but I'll refer you to some reading that you could do if you're interested in that. But I'm going to start off with a quotation from Wenger, in which he talks about a community. So in his terms, a community, as in a community of practice, is a way of talking about the social configurations in which our enterprises are defined as worth pursuing, and our participation is recognizable as competence. Now, at first glance, that looks a bit complicated. What are these social configurations? Well, for us, they are educational, they are related to our teaching and learning environments, our universities, and our ways of being and doing in our educational enterprise. And the participation, of course, is in terms of ourselves, our collaboration together, but also to our wider communication with all of you here today and others beyond. And we all hope that our participation in these areas is effective in terms of the learning of our students, and that within those areas we are developing our competence. So here, I hope, is a slightly easier to follow way of saying that. So for us within Platinum, a community, and we talk about a community of inquiry, is a group of people with common purposes and ways of being and doing related to developing mathematics teaching and learning through inquiry-based processes and practices and their associated issues, tensions, and constraints. And I emphasize that Platinum is a developmental project. We are all seeking to develop the quality of mathematics learning and teaching through the use of inquiry. So we come to inquiry, and as I've said many times, inquiry is a means of seeking out, seeking to know, exploring, investigating, pursuing, researching, delving into, finding ways of, and so on and so on. We can find words and phrases that help us to understand the complexity of what we mean by inquiry. And very often, people inquire through asking questions and exploring situations in order to find answers. And I claim, with a lot of support, that inquiry is a means of deep engagement for learning. As we ask questions, as we explore, as we try to find out, we are in the process of learning, all of us, all of the time. As we inquire, we explore, we find cases of, we see patterns, we make conjectures or hypotheses, and we're pressed to justify our claims. All of these things are very central to research in mathematics. And so all of our mathematician friends will be well aware of those processes. And the outcomes result in knowing what goes beyond memorizing, beyond practicing procedures. And it's knowing that we feel and can reconstruct if we forget. So thinking about our students learning mathematics and wanting to encourage them to go beyond memorizing, beyond practicing procedures, then I introduce you to the ideas of inquiry community. So an inquiry community is a group of people. It's as simple as that, two or more, who inquire together and learn through inquiry. It's a group which wants to know and will seek to find out. And there's a strength in community with common purposes and processes and with goals to fulfill. So we are challenged by the goals that we set out to achieve. And we have many ways of trying to achieve these goals. And these are developing through our Platinum project. As we explore together, we learn together. We gain support and momentum from others in our community. We are together, we are not working alone. It's very hard to do inquiry work alone. We need that support, encouragement, and gaining of momentum. Different ones contribute in different ways, of course, and the result is greater than the sum of its parts. We learn dynamically together. Well, many of you will be familiar already with our model of inquiry in 3 layers, where the first one is inquiry in the classroom, lecture, tutorial, or workshop. Secondly, the layer of inquiry between teachers, exploring and learning about mathematics teaching. This is what we're talking about here. And we're focused on how to use inquiry-based tasks with our students. So we're focused on what's going on in the central layer. And then the third layer is developmental research inquiry, where we gather data from our activity and analyze it to make sense and see what we're learning and what else we need to do. So here is the model in its 3 layers. I've just articulated them, so I won't go through them again. We're in the second layer, inquiry in mathematics teaching, helping to make better the activity with our students in mathematics, and in the research layer, doing research excuse me, into the two inner layers. And in the last webinar, I demonstrated that this is not just a theoretical model, it's a working model. And so you can see some of the aspects of our work related to the layers in which we are active. As well as all of this, the community of inquiry is a professional development tool. Working together results in professional learning. And so here are just a few examples of how this is happening within the project. We're sharing video clips from our teaching. Dialogue and questions lead to further inquiry, trying out new ideas, exploring what is possible for students. Meeting periodically to discuss teaching. One person talks about their own practice in some area of teaching, and we all question and discuss possibilities. In one group, we have 3 colleagues who design a set of teaching units for one of their mathematics courses. One of them teaches, one observes. They all discuss outcomes and reflect on changes, and they all learn. And the fourth example, my last one, 4 colleagues now who contribute to a course for prospective mathematics teachers. They share personal knowledge and theoretical perspectives. They relate these to their course. They design tasks and activities for their students. And with the students, they discuss solutions, mathematical and pedagogical, from which they all learn. So you can see that absolutely at the center of everything that we are doing involves inquiry and learning. And the inquiry community is the red layer that you see here, which is centrally related to the other 2 layers. So finally, the action in which we take part in a community of inquiry includes shared design of teaching, reflecting on learning outcomes, relating to what others have written, discussing or sometimes disagreeing and seeing other perspectives, gaining insight to new ideas and possibilities, and trying out new ways of working with our students. In all of these ways, we learn as we participate. And our learning results in knowing. We come to know, and as we reflect on what we are coming to know, we learn further, which creates further knowing, and so on. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Barbara. And I would like to introduce the next speaker. Professor Simon Goodchild completed his undergraduate studies in mathematics and worked as a mathematics educator in secondary schools for 16 years and in higher education for 33 years. He moved to Norway in 2004 to take up a researcher position in a mathematics teaching development project led by Barbara Jaworski. In 2014, he became the founding director of METRIC, the Center for Research, Innovation, and Coordination of Mathematics Teaching, and stepped down from the METRIC directorship in July 2020 when he semi-retired. He told us that after nearly 40 years of teaching mathematics, mathematics teacher education, and mathematics teaching development, he accepts total responsibility for the worldwide miserable performance of students in mathematics.
Hello. I'm grateful to the Platinum Project Group for giving me this opportunity to talk about communities of inquiry, which is a topic that has occupied a lot of my attention as a researcher for nearly 3 decades. And I'm grateful to you, my unseen audience, for your gracious attention. I will do my best to ensure your time in this session is not wasted. The account of communities of inquiry has its roots in communities of practice theory. If we take communities of practice theory as the starting point, we need to begin by inquiring about goals. So I start by asking, what is the goal of a university education? I really like this cartoon because beneath it there lies, I believe, an important truth. For many of our students, a university education means passing the exams and getting the diploma at the end, so they can get access to the job of their dreams. It's the diploma that enables them to jump the hurdle into their chosen profession that matters, not that they are prepared adequately for the work they're going to be doing. Recall the old and well-known proverb, give a man a fish and you feed him for a day. Teach him to fish and you feed him for a lifetime. I want to rephrase that into teach a student to a procedure and he or she can pass an exam. Teach the student how to inquire and he or she can learn for a lifetime. What is the prevailing language of your course or program? Are the words that are used, do this, copy this, memorize this formula, follow this example, repeat and rehearse, recall what I told you? Or is it the language permeated by questions such as, when will we need this? How do we do this? Where should we do this? Who invented this? What is the purpose of this? You may have noticed that there is a word missing in this list of question words, why. Why is different because why is about seeking meaning. And we can also use adverbs with the former question words. What if? What about? Where else? Who else? What other? When not? And so on. Also seeking a deeper meaning. The first set of words are about behavior. The second were about procedure. When do I do this? How do I do this? The third set of words have a language of inquiry. Now, how much time do students spend when they're studying on your courses? How much time do they spend listening and taking notes on lectures, or working on tasks from the textbook, or working in small groups, or discussing mathematics in seminars and workshops, working on open-ended problems, or in project work, working on open-ended inquiry-type tasks, creating, solving, and interpreting mathematical models, practicing examination questions, practicing routine fluency. All of these activities are important, and I guess any course will include all of them. However, what matters is what balance there is in the course. If students spend 90% of their time listening and taking notes in lectures, and only 8% on tasks from the textbook, and then only 2% on the other activities, then there's not much balance in the course. In the last 3 or 4 slides, we have seen the components of a community of practice, as set out in the theory articulated by Etienne Wenger. A community of practice has a joint enterprise, and this is where we think about what the purpose of a university education is. Is it to reproduce on demand in examinations, or is it to understand and learn how to be an independent learner? Then there is the language we use in our shared repertoire. Is it the language of behaviour, or the language of procedure, or the language of inquiry? And you may guess it is the language of inquiry that I believe is associated with understanding and learning to be an independent learner. And the third component is our mutual engagement in the practice. That is, in the joint enterprise in which we are engaged. Are the students active in learning, or are they passive and only concerned with assimilating what they have been taught? Etienne Wenger also writes about 3 modes of belonging. That is, belonging to the practice in which we participate. The practice entails participation. Students will belong through their engagement in the practice of education at university, and they will need to be motivated to do so. The second mode of belonging is imagination. This entails the vision, and for students, it is related to how they perceive the relevance of their studies to their purpose. When Etienne Wenger explains imagination, he describes 2 stonemasons. One, when asked what he is doing, replies, "I'm carving this stone into an angel." The other stonemason, asked the same question, responds, "I'm building a cathedral." Imagination enables us to see beyond the immediate and how the present activity is opening up the future. Students need to have a sense of what they are learning and why they are learning it. They need to perceive the relevance of their studies. And the third mode of belonging is alignment. Alignment to the practice that we create for students in university. They do what it takes. They come to lectures. They take the notes. And this requires an acceptance on their part. Underlying these modes of belonging, there is the student's interest. If students are interested, they will be motivated, and they will be interested if they see the relevance to what they want to do later on. And then there's also the student's trust. They won't see that everything we do in a mathematics class is immediately relevant. Sometimes it takes years for the relevance to become apparent. They need to trust, to accept the things we ask them to do are in fact worthwhile doing for them to meet their goals. And underpinning all of this is the student's agency. Students do have a choice whether to engage or not engage, whether to think further than the immediate, or to look beyond that and see how they are learning now will contribute to their future. To take the step from community of practice into community of inquiry, we need to take a closer look at Wenger's notion of belonging, which he refers to as alignment. Alignment means to line oneself up with the practice, such as in this illustration. If we want to measure the length of the match, we align the match to the scale. But suppose the match is not naturally aligned to the scale. Or suppose the scale does not start at 0. Then we need to think critically about how we're going to do this. And perhaps we need to move the scale, and eventually we can get to a point where we can still measure the match, get the correct length. It is not necessary to accept that the scale or practice cannot be moved, and the only response is to align oneself to it. There are always alternatives. In her important work about developing communities of inquiry, Barbara Jaworski introduced the notion of critical alignment. She writes, with colleagues in this case, in a community of inquiry, alignment is always critical alignment, by which we mean that as a normal part of their participation, participants question the practices in which they engage. Such questioning leads to new forms of practice, new modes of awareness of the problems and issues in developing effective ways of working, and good outcomes for students' learning. Another construct, critical stance, is related to the notion. This was developed by Aidan Kerson-Hobson. And in writing with Chris Rasmussen and colleagues, I've taken this also to apply to communities of inquiry. Aidan Kerson-Hobson explains, a critical stance is an attitude or disposition towards oneself, others, and the object of inquiry that challenges and impels learners to reflect, understand, and act. Critical alignment and critical stance are complementary constructs. Critical alignment is a mode of belonging relating to participation within a community of inquiry, leading to new forms of practice, new modes of awareness of the problems and issues in developing effective ways of working, and good outcomes for students' learning. On the other hand, critical stance is a mode of being. It is an attitude or disposition and a critical awareness. It entails reflection on one's own experience, meanings and knowing, awareness, self-evaluation, judgment and agency. If you participated in the last Platinum webinar, you would have had the pleasure of listening to John Mason. I believe John provided us with a perfect example of someone taking a critical stance towards mathematics in his inquiry about all the mathematical objects he was dealing with. A community of inquiry has its own repertoire. There is the vision of inquiry. The vision of inquiry is learning, understanding, of meaning making, of noticing. It is a disposition for learning and being aware of and taking notice of the situations, in particular the mathematical situations, learning situations, and our teaching situations as they are around us. The repertoire of a community of inquiry entails the language of inquiry. Not just the simple question words of what, when, where, but the words and adverbs that help us seek for meaning. Why, what if, what else, where else? And there are the activities. Not the activities of only listening and sitting and doing the routine and the practicing to develop fluency, but also the engaging in tasks that make us think, the problems, the projects, the modelling, the group work, and the discussion. These are the activities of a community of inquiry. IBME, that is, inquiry-based mathematics education, is the enactment of a community of inquiry. It includes inquiry tasks. It may include problem-based learning, project-based learning, mathematical modelling, flipped classroom approaches, blended learning, and many other ways in which we can stimulate inquiry and the critical alignment and critical stance that we seek within a community of inquiry. But I must briefly attend to an important side issue. The Australian educationist John Biggs writes about constructive alignment. And basically, by this, he means that it is no good taking an inquiry-based mathematics education approach to teach and then assess students using traditional procedurally-based examinations. It would be like learning to play the piano and then tested on how well you play trumpet. I have spent many years working with mathematics teachers at all levels in school and universities in attempts to develop and transform mathematics teaching into communities of inquiry and introducing inquiry-based mathematics education. All my experience convinces me that if we want to develop teaching and learning approaches in a substantial way, it will entail a transformation of learning and teaching culture. It requires patience and effort, and it is insufficient only to enact the components of a community of inquiry, such as inquiry tasks, because students will interpret their experiences according to their expectations. In other words, they will align themselves and the inquiry tasks to the practices with which they are familiar. So it is important to spend time to explain to students what is expected of them and why you are doing things differently. It also entails risk. I have noted a few steps that are necessary if you want to develop your teaching within a community of inquiry. These steps are things that were at the front of my mind as I was preparing this presentation. I don't think I claim them to be definitive or exhaustive, but I do think they are important, and I think they would be worthwhile focusing upon if you are concerned to develop your teaching practice. Starting point is you need to have a vision of how teaching and learning can be better. And you need to share your vision, work on it collaboratively within a community. It is really helpful and more enjoyable to be working with other like-minded teachers if you want to develop your practice successfully and sustainably. Be critically aligned to regular practices. Don't just do what you've always done or what has always been done. Think creatively, take risks. Don't be put off by saying, "Oh, that won't work." Try to think of ways to make new ideas, the creative innovations, work. Develop the use of language of inquiry, not just simple question words about procedures, but take it further, seeking meaning about what you're doing and learning. Take a critical stance. Be aware, ready for self-evaluation about what you understand and what you do and what could be different. Exercise judgment and agency. You can take control. Don't let the practice control you. Take small steps. Monitor what you're doing. Evaluate, improve, develop. Things might not go as you want. Think how you can improve them or change them so they do go as you want. I think it's very important to engage students as participants in the process of development. Take them along with you as fellow travellers in the community of inquiry. They've got a stake in it even more than you have because they're learning for their future. Align your assessment to teaching approaches and the intended learning outcomes. If you don't change the assessment to fit with the teaching and the learning approaches and intended outcomes, then the assessments are always going to be disappointing. There needs to be a match between the two. Don't evaluate inquiry approaches using procedural-based tests. And here's an oxymoron. Failure means success. Failure is an opportunity to learn. It is not a defeat. It's not a cause for retreat. It's a cause for advance. And finally, take the first step. So I finish by words by Martin Luther King. You don't have to see the whole staircase. Just take the first step. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Simon. And the three presenters of next talk are Reinhard Hochmuth, a professor of mathematics education at the Leibniz University, Hanover, and his two doctoral students, Sarah Helaf, researching in the area of teacher education, and Jana Peters, investigating the use of mathematics in engineering.
In this short clip, we, that is the Hanover group of the Platinum Project, want to present to you the spider charts, a tool that we developed together with the Platinum community to describe and reflect on IBM-E activities. Let's take a first look at the spider charts. The tool consists of 3 charts, which you can see here. Each chart addresses a specific focus of reflection that is given in the center of the chart. The 3 foci, which basically represent different perspectives on IBM-E activities, are inquiry learning, inquiry teaching, and group of inquiry. To each perspective belongs a set of aspects that is thought to be relevant to that particular perspective on an IBM-E activity. The aspects can be found in the outermost white ring of the chart. So here, for example, exploration is considered an important aspect of inquiry learning. The 3 rings between the center of the chart and the outermost ring are divided into fields that distinguish quality nuances of each aspect and will be ticked in the process of filling in the chart. The spider charts as a tool were developed with the intention to facilitate project-wide thinking and communication about IBM-E and about activities in local groups, to promote reflection and further elaboration of our common vision of integrating more IBM-E in our teaching. And third, to do this while taking into account the local specificities of the Platinum partners. We come across the idea of spider charts in a contribution by Lübke, Reimann, and Heudorfer, who had picked up an earlier idea by Prue. In 2013, Prue proposed a so-called wheel model that was intended to facilitate the identification of choices to be made in developing research-based pedagogies. Lübke and colleagues modified this idea to create a double wheel model that they used to classify research-oriented teaching at university level. We then picked up this idea and adapted it to the specific needs and theoretical basis of the Platinum project. Our adaptation of the charts started out on the basis of literature. The selection of each chart's aspects, for example, was first based on aspects mentioned by Dorier and Mars, who proposed a general idea of definition of inquiry-based mathematics education, and by Artig and Blumhoy, who provide an overview of existing forms of IBM-E with a focus on approaches typically pursued in school contexts. In the course of the development process, the selection of aspects relied more and more on discussions at our international Platinum meetings. There were several rounds of negotiations about which aspects should be considered the most relevant in the community.
As we said earlier, we developed the spider chart as a tool for reflection. But what exactly do we mean by this? In more concrete terms, the spider charts guide teachers through a structured session of reflection about their teaching, or more precisely, about one of their IBM-E activities. The reflection can spark new ideas that help flesh out the notion of IBM-E underlying the teaching project and may create opportunities to uncover formerly overlooked potentials in the local teaching learning setting. We decided to make 3 charts that each address one of 3 perspectives on teaching learning scenarios. The perspective of students and their scope of possible actions within the learning environment is addressed in the chart Inquiry Learning. The perspective of teachers when performing classroom work is captured in the chart Inquiry Teaching. The spider charts Inquiry Learning and Inquiry Teaching can be used to reflect upon IBM-E activities that take place in classrooms. They lead to a visual display of the didactical choices made by the teacher with the intention to engage students in mathematical inquiry. The perspective of teachers in their work environment outside the classroom is the topic of the third chart, Group of Inquiry. The third chart focuses on the collaborative work of the local group of inquiry. It serves to reflect and visually display how the local communities within Platinum organize their teamwork. As shown in the beginning, the outermost ring of each chart shows aspects of IBME that are of particular relevance to the perspective addressed by the chart. The three rings between the center of the chart and the outermost ring are divided into fields that will be ticked in the process of filling in the chart. The fields between an aspect and the center represent a continuum of quality nuances of that aspect. By ticking one of the boxes for each aspect, one on every spider chart, the user answers the question, to what extent is the aspect present in the reflected IBME activity, and in what way does the aspect manifest itself in the reflected IBME activity? The outer and inner one of the four tickable boxes describe the two ends of the continuum, such as open and closed, digital and analog, applied and theoretical, and so on. Different aspects may have different continuums of quality nuances. The middle box is always split into quantitative and qualitative. Quantitative means the IBME activity contains elements of both continuum ends in equal amounts, and qualitative means the IBME activity can best be described as being between both ends in terms of gradation. We will now look at an example.
As example, we will take the spider chart inquiry teaching, select the aspect called tasks, and try to decide which box to tick. Normally, before filling the charts, two decisions have to be made. First, the spider chart user needs to decide which IBME activity should be focused and what exactly constitutes this activity. Secondly, the user needs to specify the group of inquiry that will be relevant for the third spider chart. We will not do this here, however, as describing an entire case would take up too much time. We would like to stress, though, that the mentioned choices will impact the significance of each of the three spider charts for the description and reflection of the chosen IBME activity. The spectrum of eligible IBME activities is broad and can range from single exercises conducted in one specific session of a course to an entire course which was designed to contain IBME. Anyways, let's go back to our example. We take the spider chart inquiry teaching and pick the aspect tasks. In order to decide which box to tick, we need to answer the question, what are the tasks like that students are expected to solve during my IBME activity? Are my tasks maybe similar to modeling problems? In other words, do they refrain from providing fixed quality criteria for solutions? And do they allow for non-mathematical arguments and knowledge to be applied? Do my tasks leave room for a wide variety of different solutions or different types of solution? If this is the case, then my tasks can be labeled weakly formatted. But what about the other end of the spectrum? Do I maybe give tasks which limit the range of acceptable task solutions? For example, by demanding that arguments must adhere to specific quality standards? Do I insist that the language used in task solutions must adhere to specific norms of communication? Do I presuppose that there are only correct and incorrect solutions to my tasks? An example of this would be the task of formally proving a mathematical theorem. In this case, tasks are maybe more on the side of strongly formatted. But what if neither of these options fit my situation well? Well, if there are about as many tasks that are strongly formatted as there are weakly formatted tasks, then quant for quantitative should be ticked. If, on the other hand, most tasks seem to be neither strongly nor weakly formatted, If instead their quality can be located somewhere in between these two extremes, then qual for qualitative should be ticked. In conclusion, we believe that the spider charts are a tool that can support critical alignment in practice in the sense of Jaworski's presentation at the KHDM web seminar, the 21st of April 2021. They help reveal and question implicit assumptions and expectations by calling attention to aspects of the IBME activity that may not have been at the center of attention during the activity's development. They also incite to try out innovative approaches to explore alternative ways of doing and being to achieve fundamental goals. And they do this by bringing to awareness alternative scenarios, the process of making sense of and imagining each aspect's quality nuances. The charts can support communication and, in consequence, collaboration within local groups of inquiry and across groups. That means project-wide. They help to articulate partners' different ideas and to characterize each of the various contributions in this project. In this way, they also help grasp and compare creative leeways and thus to express the specificities of each Platinum project. Overall, we consider the spider charts to be a reflection tool that can support the further development of our teaching in the direction of enhanced inquiry orientation. Instead of categorizing, the charts are intended to inspire processes of critical alignment, processes that provide space and incentive for the formation of a common vocabulary and that create opportunities for an identification or formation of IBME ideas within our community of inquiry. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thanks all the presenters. Dear participants, I remind you can ask a question on the Padlet. And now let's have a 5-minute break. Thank you for your listening.
All right, welcome back to our webinar. So right now we have questions, just 10-minute slot for questions to the presenters in the first block. So I would like to invite Simon, Barbara, and Sarah to switch on their videos. And I am looking at the Padlet and I have got the first question there. How can I motivate my colleagues to join or create a community of inquiry? Who would like to answer this question?
Well, I can try.
Go ahead, Barbara.
Okay. You know, sometimes it's not easy to persuade our colleagues to join us because it seems like this might involve a lot of extra work. And they perhaps believe that they've established very good ways of working already, that they do a very good job for their students, and so on. So what is going to persuade them that there might be other things to think about? I suppose that's really the question we're addressing. Well, I look back to when I first came to Loughborough, and there were many mathematicians at Loughborough that I didn't know, and it was really a daunting experience for me. How do I get across to some of these people who are very important and very experienced? And what I did do was to approach a couple of people who were recommended to me as people who were willing to think about new ideas. And one of them was very interested in what I was suggesting. And he came and worked with me and another colleague. And through our work together, he was rather influential among the mathematicians, and he was able to do some persuading. So, I mean, of course, there are many ways of addressing this question, but one way is to find someone who goes a little way towards what it is that you're trying to do and achieve, and try to do something with them that they can enjoy and learn from and share with their colleagues. And then perhaps over time, and this is what happened at Loughborough, as maybe Stephanie will say something about, that we were able to persuade some of our mathematician colleagues that it was worth thinking about other ways of working.
Thank you very much, Barbara. So as I gather, influential mathematicians decide a lot in this situation. We have the next question coming. What suggestions do you have for making a community of inquiry sustainable given the workload of staff? So that's also a very interesting question. Who would like to take it? Simon, you were talking about community of inquiry and how to engage people. Maybe you would like to say a few words about this.
Okay, I think that there's workload on two fronts. One front is the students' workload, and the other is the workload on teachers. The whole point of having a community of inquiry and approaching mathematics through inquiry is to make learning more effective. And so at the end of the day, an effective community of inquiry and effective inquiry-based mathematics education should not mean more work for students. It should mean more effective work for students. But it doesn't happen just like that. And I think the teacher has a big job to do to convince the students, his students, her students, why we are approaching things in the way that we are approaching them. We have to take them with us along the way. It's no good thinking that we can impose something in some oppressive way on students. We have to engage them as partners and convince them by our sound arguments of why what we are doing is very good for them. Most people can be persuaded to take really horrible medicine if the doctor can persuade them that that medicine is worth taking. As far as the teachers are concerned, and there's a lot of work for teachers as well, first of all, the message that you're hearing today is a community of inquiry. So we share the workload. And the second is take small steps. Don't try to do too much at once. Allow the momentum to grow and to develop. Think about one thing. What is one thing that I could change in my practice? And it may be something as simple as I'll change the language. Instead of having the language of when, what, where, what if? Why? When else could I do this? So that doesn't take much more time, but it does take concentration. And I'm sure Barbara could add to everything I've said there.
Thank you very much, Simon. So as I understand, we have to fairly share the co-creation of knowledge and community with students. This perfectly fits Barbara's theoretical model with 3 layers where students are an important part of it, but we need to emphasize that if we share with the students our desire to contribute to the community of inquiry, then it helps either side in this work. One more question I have here coming, which is there is a huge pressure to cover all the content in the syllabus. How can I find time for developing my teaching within a community of inquiry? It seems to take a lot of time that I cannot afford. Sarah, would you like to take this?
Well, I was just thinking about this myself. I think what has been said before, that there's an opportunity to share work in the community of inquiry might be helpful in this case, so that it's not one person changing their way of teaching alone by themselves, but maybe different people contributing ideas, maybe developing tasks together and testing them at the same time, talking about it, discussing about it, maybe also about improving well, but I think this is all I can say about this, because maybe there should, like, maybe higher ups can be approached to ask if some institutional change could be implemented so that there might be time for this type of developmental activity. But I don't know. Yeah, it depends on the institution, I guess.
Thank you. So if I combine what you said with what Simon said, it's make small steps and don't be alone. So engage your colleagues, and then it will be easier to find time and inspiration and exchange the ideas. So community thing is a big advancement to working just alone. We have one more question. It's basically what we experience every time. When I lecture, students want to copy what I write on the board with their own nice, neat notes. They are very active copying, but I do not believe they are actively thinking and reflecting on what I am saying. How can I encourage my students to become more cognitively active in lectures? So this is a very complicated question. Who would like to take it? Sarah?
Well, I want to make one contribution to this question. As far as I've heard, there's evidence that meta information about the contents of the lecture is easily lost when students are somehow forced to copy during the lecture. So for example, in my case, back at the university, there was no online material, there was no script, there was no book. So I was basically forced to copy what was written on the board in the lecture. And I personally was indeed not able to cognitively follow very well because of the parallel activity of having to copy. So for me, it would have helped if there had been an opportunity, a way of participating in the course without having to copy, such as, for example, a LaTeX script that, for example, was prepared in advance. So I would have been able to print it out, bring it into the lecture. And then, for example, I could have put comments about meta information next to the information that was printed out. For example, if the lecturer says, well, this lemma will be used a lot in proofs in the upcoming lessons, then I could have put this into the notes instead of just copying the lemma and not hearing this.
Thank you very much, Sarah. I'm sorry I have to interrupt you because we are running out of time. Thank you all. We still have questions and answers. We'll take them next time. And now it's over to Maria. Thank you all.
Thanks to all participants in questions and answers session. And these are the speakers in the second block. Let me introduce the next presenters. Lukasz Masilko is an educational specialist and a senior counselor of the Support Center for Students with Special Needs at Masaryk University. He has been teaching many students with special educational needs, in most cases blind and partially sighted, deaf, and hard of hearing. Stephanie Thomas is a lecturer at Loughborough University. She teaches a large and very diverse cohort of students on their foundation program. In her current cohort, 12% of students have an identified need ranging from dyslexia to mental health and physical health issues. She also has experience of tutoring students with an identified need on a one-to-one basis. Please, colleagues.
Okay, hello. It takes me some time to put my microphone on. I'm sorry for that. Thank you, Maria, for introducing ourselves. I would like to start me and then give words to Stephanie. Our focus is students with special needs or with identified needs. It is one of the 3 core topics of Platinum Project, besides education or didactics, and besides new technologies, ICT, and digital competencies. now you can see the list of students with identified needs and their groups, which we are focusing on. So we are in contact with students with specific learning differences, or students with mental health issues, autism spectrum disorders, physical mobility disabilities, visual and hearing impairment, or other chronic conditions like diabetes or epilepsy. The reason why we sort the groups in this way is according to our experience, because very often we meet with students with dyslexia or attention deficit. Nowadays, when almost all the year or maybe 2 years, all the instruction was online, a lot of students come to us with their mental health issues. And on the other side, we do not have so many opportunities to speak or to collaborate with students, blind students, partial deaf students, or partial blind students, partial sighted students, sorry. It's over to you, Stefan.
Thank you. Next slide. I want to start thinking about what we mean by disability. Please look at image 1. You see the entrance to a building, and that could be a bank, a library, it could be a shop or a restaurant, or even a school or university. My question to you to think about, and I will pause after the question, is what do you think when you see this person who wants to enter the building? Okay, so you've had some thoughts. Next slide. Please now look at image 2. What do you think now? I hope that was enough time for you to have a thought. What were your thoughts? In image 1, did you think that the person cannot get up the stairs, the person is using a wheelchair, and so cannot climb the stairs to get in the building? He will need help to get into the building, and he may have to call for help, as it looks there's nobody there ready to help him. In image 2, you probably thought, well, this person actually doesn't have a problem anymore. The building is built with a ramp, and he can enter the building, which now looks like a restaurant quite easily, without help. He's not disadvantaged. He can enter the building, if that is his goal, with the same way as any other person can. What if we have never invented stairs to get into buildings? What if all buildings have always been built with ramps? Then a person in a wheelchair with such a disability would not feel disabled even, because he would not need any help to get into a building. He can do so independently, and he would not feel disadvantaged at all for the purpose of entering buildings. So when we think about a person's disability and focusing on the person and what the person cannot do, we talk about the medical model of disability. Next slide. But when we focus on the barriers that prevent a person to take part in everyday activities, we call that the social model of disability. Such as in image 2, the person in a sense was not disabled. So when we've adopted the social model to think about the barriers that limit access and limit inclusion in everyday activities, including education, we want to look at the barriers that prevent a person from performing the same way as any other person. If we look at removing these barriers in education, then the responsibility lies with the institutions, not the person, okay? Including the educational institutions. So in the social model, educational institutions take responsibility for breaking down barriers and ensure an inclusive learning environment so that students with an identified need can participate independently and equally in the learning environment. When removing barriers, and there's something to add and think about, we often find that it's not only the person with a disability who benefits. If you think about the situation with the ramps, it's not just the person in the wheelchair who has easy access. Old people will, as will parents pushing a baby in a pram. Over to Lukas.
Thank you, Stephanie. I will continue with experience of our experience and our partners in Platinum Project. I created a short survey which was sent to all the partners of the Platinum Project in the first year, and all the partners confirmed these two facts. The first fact is that they receive information on students with identified needs almost in all cases in the beginning of the semester. But of course, they develop their courses well in advance, not at the beginning of the semester. So we came into conclusion that we should take the diversity of students and their needs into account when designing courses, and not do that on demand, just on the spot. So these previous ideas require a tool for the teachers to design courses in advance and to respect in such a design all the different needs of students which will come in the future to your courses. And I suppose I can confirm that universal design is an option to choose. It is the methodology based on the idea which I will read from the slide. It is the citation. So it is the design of products and environments that can be used by everyone in the greatest possible extension without the need for adaptations or special aids. It is based on the 7 principles: equitable use, flexibility in use, simple and intuitive use, perceptible information, tolerance for error, low physical effort, and size and space for approach and use. Authors of this methodology give general recommendations how to design products, buildings, or other types of environment to be usable by as many persons as possible. That's why there are added 2 last principles on low physical effort and size and space for approach and use, because it is not only about environment, educational environment, but it is also about accessibility of buildings and other types of environment. There is a nice image. I would like to demonstrate the fact that sometimes it is not reasonable to ensure equal access to aids. It is sometimes better to facilitate equity in using these aids during some activity. Okay, let's go into another slide. I would like to mention some other guidelines which are closely related to universal design. The first one is universal design for learning, which is more closely associated with education. It is based on the principles of universal design and offers a set of pedagogical recommendations, and teachers can find advice on how to provide students with multiple means of engagement, so they can then better motivate learners to learn. Then they find multiple means of representation, so then they can address different needs and preferred learning styles of their students. So students will be able to find connections between information received and communicate with other colleagues their own ideas when solving a problem. And last one, multiple means of action and expression, in order to optimize students' learning processes and offer them different options to demonstrate knowledge and skills. So they will know how to learn and how to demonstrate their knowledge effectively. Then there is another tool, another methodology, which is more closely related to digital content. It is Web Content Accessibility Guidelines and Authoring Tool Accessibility Guidelines, which are both designed by World Wide Web Consortium. And I would like to say that these recommendations, these guidelines, are not to use only according to the content of websites, but they can be usable for creating digital content in general. To summarize these methodologies, universal design is a tool for teachers who wish to ensure that their instruction is accessible to as many students as possible. And following these principles will help students with identified needs, but not only them, but all the learners. In the following slides, we would like to offer some recommendations on universal design principles that are focused on inquiry in mathematics. So, what is inquiry in mathematics, and what students do during inquiry in mathematics? According to Michel Artig and Morten Blomhøj, inquiry means interacting in small groups or together with teachers. Students can examine textbooks and other sources of information. They can use tools to gather, analyze, and interpret data. They can make observations, propose explanations and predictions, or they can communicate results of their work. Let's identify pedagogical processes being held during inquiry. Of course, it can be held at some environment, like a large hall, a small classroom, a computer, or another lab. The students can manipulate some instruments, they can use computers. But very often, it starts with teacher's presentation of the problem. The teacher can, of course, prepare some instructions or information resources students are supposed to work with during inquiry. Very often, students work in teams, and they may prepare also not only in session activities or in session solutions of problems, but of course, long-term projects beyond the instruction, beyond the session. Of course, as was said in the previous slide, they can use specialized software applications. It is an important part of inquiry that they discuss their findings, observations, they share their thoughts, or they pose questions to students or teachers. And finally, they sometimes may be asked to present their results with others. Okay, so let's start with teachers' presentations as the first pedagogical process we mentioned in the previous slides. We prepared a set of small recommendations, and I will start with that one, which in my opinion is very important. I recommend you to provide instruction and other resources for students ahead of time in a digital format, if possible in editable format. It is very useful for students to have this in advance, so they can be prepared. They can convert the materials into the format which is more accessible to them, and they can be then much less stress when coming into the session. Speak clearly, keep eye contact when speaking, use a microphone, repeat comments and questions from others, and wait a second to talk about details you refer to visually. This is useful for students with hearing impairment, who sometimes can read the lips of the teacher, or they can follow the sign language interpreter or speech-to-text transcription. But it is also useful for students who are non-native language speakers. They can follow you more carefully, and they can understand more. And it is also useful for students who follow the video recordings of your instruction, because then they can understand all what is happening in your classroom. Another recommendation is comment on all displayed text, describe visuals, describe actions that can be recognized only by sight. Again, it is useful for students who follow you at the video recordings if you prepare that, but it's also useful for students with visual impairment, as they cannot follow all the visual subjects and stimulus during instruction. And very important recommendation is that you need to make sure that everything is clear to students. For example, goals, time plan, resources, and application to use when doing inquiry. Another process is information resources. The teacher, he or she can prepare information resources in advance. As I said, it is very useful. And we have some recommendations how to create these resources to be, let's say, more accessible to as many students as possible. But the first, you should create content that can be presented in different ways. And in order to do so, you need to use standard formatting tools or formats to enable customization of display or print, and to set the speed and volume of multimedia or other things. So, for example, students with visual impairment can transfer your resources into the format which is accessible to them. They can work with it. The second recommendation, enhance the visual readability of a document. And we can recommend you to use, for example, the Dyslexia Star Guide from British Dyslexia Association. The link to this guide is below on this slide, so you can take it, you can download it and use it. Another recommendation is to help users to navigate and find content in your resources. So use headings, use table of contents. If there is a long text, try to divide such a long text in some lists, bulleted or numbered lists. It will help users to navigate in your text and to orient it in that better. Make the content more accessible. It is, of course, again, very important that the content is accessible to your students, and therefore it is needed or it is helpful to give students summary of goals, resources, and knowledge. You can give them glossaries of new terms, or you can visualize some structural relations and their composition. You can use colors to visualize important things. All these aids and addings will help students to easily understand what they will learn and what is important. And the last recommendation is to use standard tools also to input mathematical symbols. So the students with visual impairment or physical disability can easily convert your resource into the format that they are used to work when using assistive technologies. And now it's my pleasure to give the word to Stephanie to give some examples.
Okay, I'm mindful of the time. Next slide, please. I've selected an example to talk about from my teaching at Loughborough. It is with foundation students. As mentioned, I teach a very large group. And these are students taking a one-year course before they enter their degree in engineering or science, mostly going to engineering and science. This is a large group, about 150 each year, and I have many students with identified needs. So I devised some tasks involving inquiry on the topic of complex numbers. Now, students worked in pairs in a computer lab and used the software called Autograph. And Autograph is similar to the software GeoGebra that many people know. And they were asked to explore addition and subtraction of complex numbers, multiplication, the complex conjugate, and raising a complex number to a power. I'm presenting here something popping up. I'm presenting to you the first task that was on their activity sheet. which was on the addition of complex numbers. So my focus here is on how presented the tasks, the first step in the pedagogical process. The autograph file that students saw is in the top left, and the instructions are on the right. The file at the bottom left is how the first part of the question plays out. Next slide. Here are the instructions a little bit bigger so you can actually read them. As you can see, there are a lot of instructions. There are 7 separate parts from A to G, and there are a lot of words there. And feedback from students was that it was very detailed, and it was too wordy, too long. And feedback from some of the dyslexic students I teach was that they lost track where they were. So in the following year, I tried to reduce the instructions. Next slide. So this is the task in the format I used the following year. And I hope you can see that it looks much simpler. It certainly is shorter. There is less to read, and it seems less to do. There are only 5 separate parts, but the task overall hasn't changed. It's just the way it's presented. Now, this task could be improved further. And now that I had engaged with some of the recommendations that Lukáš put forward during the Platinum project, I've thought about how this could be improved further. Next slide. It could be improved by adding approximate times for each task and for the task overall. This helps students with Asperger syndrome or autism who need a bit more structure. They like to know some boundaries to the time to spend on tasks, or they would end up spending hours exploring the relationship between complex numbers. But it also helps students more general, because managing their time is still an activity people have to get used to. And giving a time limit, you have a better understanding of how far to take a task. Ironically, it also helped me as their teacher, because it made me realize adding times of how realistic my demands were on the students in the time given in the computer lab. Now, this task could be improved further. Next slide. So we have got the time added. What we could also do is add color. Color is quite often a useful tool for dyslexic students. And part of the program dyslexic students undergo, if they're identified at Loughborough, is one-to-one mentoring, where they're often taught to use color to help them keep track. So with the coloring, each complex number Z1, Z2, and Z has a different color, and each time it is mentioned, the color is added to that letter. Now, it also matches the autographs slide where Z1 was blue, for example. So I hope this is helpful for thinking about teaching. Certainly, I'm going to use more of these kind of things in the future. Now, on the next slide, I want to present something a little bit different, which also may be useful to think about depending what you're doing in your teaching. Now, this is an example from a colleague at Loughborough who was using this in one-to-one teaching sessions. Dyslexic students like to see the whole picture before they perform smaller tasks. It's quite opposite to how many of us operate, where we're happy to do small steps and then put the parts together at the end. So dyslexic students tend to think more holistically, and it helps them to keep track of the whole process on one page. Color helps to see where the subtasks are, and it indicates which partial differentiation is performed at any given time and how they are then drawn together to solve the problem. Now, displaying a solution on one page is helpful for students with dyslexia, but it's also helpful for students more generally, as they may understand better the way the process works than, say, if you gave bullet points. It makes this process very explicit. Just adding times to tasks is needed, or I would say necessary for students with Asperger's or autism, but it's still helpful to a much wider range of students, especially when working on unfamiliar tasks, which many of the IBM tasks we are trialing are. It is quite unknown territory for students, so giving times is actually a very useful tool. Mindful of time, Lukasz, over to you.
Thank you. Okay, next slide. So we will continue with another pedagogical process during inquiry, a very important one, collaborative work and projects. There's the first recommendation from us, which is that you should ensure that no one is isolated or disadvantaged. This is very important in order to keep all the students in track and don't make them feel anxious when collaborating with their colleagues. We divided this recommendation into two parts, short in-session activities and long-term project activities. In short in-session activities, you of course need to save time, and therefore it is recommended to do flexible grouping, which is very fast done. You can, for example, propose to your students to form groups with colleagues sitting next to them. That's enough. And that would save your time and give enough time to students to inquire. On the other hand, when they should inquire in a long-term period, then we recommend to give fixed groupings because then students do not feel disadvantaged by the fact that some group is chosen by students. They collaborate with themselves in previous courses, and then they are much more faster when doing the project. So in order to give an equal opportunity to all the students, it is better to have the fixed grouping. But of course, because it is a long-term project, you need to give students some rules how they can participate in the group and how they contribute to the project. And it is also important, and I will show that in some example, to give students some tools for organizing activities and for time scheduling of their activities. Because if it is a project for 3 months, then of course you need to divide your activity to the smaller steps, and you need some time to do these steps. And it is important to make this following one by one in order to finish the project in time. There's one more recommendation. Do not force participation in a group if a team working is not a main activities goal. Sometimes students prefer to work alone, to read resources without communicating to each other, to think about the problem by themselves. So if it is not necessary, you can leave them alone and give them freedom to collaborate by themselves only. And the last one recommendation, it is very helpful for students if they receive a constructive feedback which is in time, which is frequent, and which is also specific on topic. Sorry. I have two more examples. One is example of short in-session activity. You can see the instruction for students. It is the activity which is in a form of a game between members of one team. And there are some examples of tasks which one student can give to other students of the team, and the other students of the team can then find a function which meet the requirements of the first student. And I'm asking what should be specified more, because it seems to me that this activity is a bit open. And according to our recommendations and according to the example of Stephanie, the first thing is to give students some information about the time which is reserved for this activity. So they know if they can play the game very short time and then come to some results, or they can play a bit more and be more amused and so on. According to my experience, because I gave this task during my instruction of mathematical analysis for students in my seminar groups, I was surprised that some of the students use the examples which are stated here as examples of requirements. It was not my intention, and it was only examples, not proposals that students should use during the game. So next time, I plan to be more explicit and ask students to create their own examples, not use that ones which are displayed. And one more recommendation, which I was experienced, I didn't do in the first following, is that you need to inform students about your expectations on final discussions on this activity, because they need to know what will be after the activity in order to prepare themselves to contribute to discussion. So that's first example. And another example is an example of long-term scheduling. You can see a table with dates, due dates, and the description of some subtasks which student should proceed in order to finalize the project in time in Monday, May 20, as it is displayed here. It is very useful for students to have such a summary, because then they, as I said before, then they have some information what to do, how to divide the long project into small activities, and how to come into the results which are desired by teacher. Okay, I think that we have not so many minutes left, so we have 3 more slides with some other recommendations on pedagogical processes, which I introduced in some previous slide. So using software applications, I mean specialized software applications like computer algebra systems, MATLAB, Maple, or some statistical software, or for example, GeoGebra. The first recommendations is to let the students know in advance about these applications they are expected to work with, in order to prepare them to use these applications without any problem during your session. It will save your time. Then you will not solve the problems of students with different devices, different operating systems, such as Windows and other systems, such as iPads, tablets, laptops, and so on. If you give them some support suitable materials and help them with installation of the software on their computers, then it will save your time, and it will also give opportunity to students with slower working pace to be more prepared and to be prepared in advance for the session. And so they then feel more comfortable during the instruction. The last one is that in case of students with visual impairment or the students with physical disability, they work with applications in a different way with assistive technologies. And therefore it is necessary to ask special ICT experts in advance to give some advice how to use your chosen application with these assistive technologies. So do it in advance, and you probably find some way how students with these impairments can work with application, even they have no visual, they cannot see, sorry. The pedagogical process discussions, it is very important one. and we also prepare some recommendations in order to enable some friendly atmosphere, some open atmosphere during your instruction. It is very helpful to value each individual's contribution and respond patiently. Students then will not be afraid to offer their opinion in front of the others. Another very helpful recommendation is to indicate basic behavioral expectations and rules for discussions. This recommendation is helpful when you have students with autism spectrum disorder, which are sometimes not able to work with the time, and they can speak much more than it is expected, or they can add comments which are off topic. If they have these rules, they can understand better how they can participate in discussions. Or they cannot be confused how they can enter the discussion. That's another problem for these students, that they don't know in which time they can give their comment to the discussion. There is one more recommendation to offer multiple options for communication. So, for example, it is helpful that students do not contribute to the discussions only in a verbal way, but you can also establish some activities which are hands-on, or some students who are afraid to speak in front of others, they can give the comments in a written way. They can write something on the paper or share it in the digital document and send it to us. Send it to you, sorry. And I'm not sure if I have some time more.
Well, we're nearly out, but so you
are nearly out, so
go through them. Though.
Yeah, so this is the last recommendation. I will only shortly comment. It is useful to give some pause between the speakers who contribute to discussion, because students need to process information which was spoken by the previous speaker. And I think that's time, because yeah, thank you, Maria. So we didn't talk about the last process, but I can share the presentation with the audience, and they can see it later. Thank you very much. And please, if you have any comments, if you have any questions, put them in the Padlet.
Thank you, Lucas and Stephanie. It was really interesting. Dear participants, now let's have a 5-minute break, and after that we will have some activity. So we are waiting for you here. Thank you.
Good afternoon again, and welcome back to our webinar. So we received plenty of questions. I would like to ask Lucas and Stephanie to switch their videos on. And the first question I have to address to you is, could you please tell us more about the assessment of students with special needs?
Okay, I can start. Very often, adaptation or accommodation for students with special needs is giving them extra time, because in many cases they work slower, read slower or write slower. That's a very common accommodation. And the other accommodation which I would like to recommend is to respect their way of working with resources. So if they prefer to work digitally on the computer, then you should respect this preference, because then they feel more comfortable when replying to your questions or solving the problems. So that's the first ideas which came to my mind. Maybe Stephanie can add more.
Well, it's similar at Loughborough University, that in the case of dyslexic students, that extra time is allowed. Students with mental health issues often take exams not in the main lecture hall with all the other students, but sit in smaller rooms with fewer students or on their own. Some students get a reader in some cases. I have had one student who had 100% extra time and could take rest breaks. So basically could take an exam almost over a whole day because of a physical disability, a broken back, which caused pain. So he could not focus on the task for that long. So it depends, but generally speaking, extra time. For some students, exam papers have to be printed on a certain color. But otherwise, you expect students in assessments, say written exam for mathematics, to take them as any other student. I should add that for engineering degrees, group work is one of the learning outcomes. So even if a student, such a student on the autism spectrum disorder, favors working on his own, if group work is a learning outcome, that student has to be assessed on it and has to take part. So there's no exemption from the assessment if it is an identified learning outcome on the program, which might or might not be the case. And I have come across that example.
Thank you very much, Stephanie. And now we will reverse a little bit the direction of the questions and answers session, and we have the question for our participants. So please select the answer which is the most appropriate for you, and we'll see the result in a minute or so.
I expect higher participation, please.
We have many more registered participants watching.
Yes.
Now, so please be active. The time is running.
I can't click on it.
Well,
I can't take part. Oh, no.
No, we can't. Well, we can end the polling. Yeah, now we can.
Yeah, now we can. That's all right. So this is how we feel when we have voting activities with our students. You know, we know there are 90 students in the group and only 30 responses.
Right. Thank you very much for answering.
Do we
this.
have some? Yeah.
And there will be one more question to our presenters.
Can I just comment on the poll?
Yeah, please, go ahead.
It is true that quite often people don't know how many students they have with an identified need. I also would like to just mention why we say special needs. I mean, special needs has quite a negative connotation. We often think about persons with special needs to be have an inability to communicate well or to learn, have a learning disability rather than a learning difference. So that is why we talk more about identified need on additional need. So they are capable of the work, especially in terms of education, but just need an adjustment. And in the UK, it is now part of general law almost that we have to provide for all students that come through our doors. But a student does not need to disclose the disability. So if you don't know how many you have, then in the UK, this would be quite right, because you should not actually know the people individually. Now, I sometimes get to know the students and they're having a disability because they tell me. I also can look it up for exam purposes. But generally, I don't do it at start, and it's up to the students to communicate and spread that, because some students do not want to disclose it, and we have to respect that confidentiality.
Thank you, Stephanie. Another question is about the specialized digital tools and applications for working with students. If you can give any recommendations, please.
I'm sorry, I was too short to comment on that because of lack of time. But as I said, it can be a problem to use such an application if you are visually impaired or you have a physical disability. And in that case, it is useful to know that these people can manipulate these applications different way. For example, only from the keyboard, and or they cannot see all the screen, but only the part of that, or something else. So that's why it is important to have in mind that if some student with such a disability appears in your class, then you need to know to whom you can address the question, how can this person work with the specialized application, which is not standard one, because these students are used to work with standard applications. They can read emails, write emails, they can use text editors and so on. But if it is a specialized application they are not familiar with, then it could be more difficult for them to work with this application.
Thank you very much, Lucas. One more question is it necessary for the university to have specialists who can confirm special needs?
That is what I was going to add to on the digital side. We actually have a team at Loughborough University who engage with students who are on our register of identified needs. So it's not us as teachers and lecturers who have to engage with the student or find out what to do. It's actually the team who will tell us what needs to be in place. And we are required to do it. So if our disability services say that these students need notes in advance in a certain format, then we have to provide it. If that student needs a specific software, because that is what he must use, then it will be translated into that by our team. Or I'm encouraged, if I can do it myself, of course, if it's just as easy in LaTeX to change the format or the font size, etc., or put color in, or double spacing. That's something I had to do for one student once. The requirement was to have all instructions double spaced rather than single spaced, and I did that myself. So, but it's the disability office here that takes the first step to ensure that the needs are met.
Thank you very much, Stephanie. Unfortunately, we run out of the time and we still have plenty of questions, so we need to finish this session. Thank you very much. And it's over to you, Maria, again.
Thank you very much, Yuri. Dear participants, you can see that our webinar will be continued by the next speaker and panel discussion. And it's an honor for me to introduce Morten Blomhøy. He's a professor of mathematics education at Aarhus University and the leader for the Danish National Center for Developing Mathematics Teaching. His main interests are in the interplay between research and development of teaching practice, inquiry-based teaching, and mathematical modeling. Please, Morten.
One remark that I would like to start with is the connection between inquiry and modeling. The thing is that whenever you use mathematics outside mathematics itself for inquiring a problem situation, then there will necessarily be involved a model. It will be part of what you're doing when you inquire some situation or problem outside mathematics. You need to do modeling. And of course, if you want to teach mathematical modeling, if you want to support the learning of mathematical modeling, then you need to create a situation where the students can inquire by means of modeling. That's indispensable. So there's a very close connection between these two elements. Yeah, so my presentation today is about mathematical modeling in epidemiology as an exemplary case for how to support students' development of modeling competency. And I have 3 sections, as you can see here. The focus is how do we characterize and support students' progress in mathematical competency in interdisciplinary problem-oriented project work at bachelor level. So I'm building on the experiences from supervising modeling projects and projects in general in mathematics and in science in our bachelor program at Roskilde University, where I was until half a year ago, or nearly a year ago now. And I've been there for 30 years, working together with colleagues on how to supervise projects. So that's a special form of teaching mathematics in a bachelor program, which has certain aspects and qualities. Of course, it's difficult to maybe use that experiences to transfer that type of experiences from that type of educational setting onto more traditional forms of mathematics teaching. Yeah, I think you can go on to the next one, please. Yeah, so what we are building on here in terms of concept for defining mathematical modeling competency is the COM framework, in which modeling is identified as one of the 8 competencies summing up to mathematical competency. Please, the next one. And here we have a definition of modeling competence, which is closely related to the modeling process. So it's the capacity to autonomously and in collaboration with others to carry through a full modeling cycle and to reflect about the processes involved in such a modeling process. So modeling competency includes both the analytical side and a productive side. It's also part of modeling competence to be able to analyze mathematical modeling processes which you have not necessarily conducted yourself. Please, the next one. Here we have a model of the modeling cycle. It's a model I have developed and used together with colleagues. Of course, there are other models of modeling process and its processes, and it's not important which exact model you want to use. There could be different uses of different types of models of modeling processes. The important thing here is to realize that there are different processes involved in such a modeling cycle: formulating a problem, systematizing, mathematizing, analyzing mathematical model, interpreting and evaluation of the model results, and validation of the whole process. Please, the next one. Yeah, so in general, there are 3 dimensions in which progress in competences can be measured or conceptualized, maybe I should say that, in the COM framework. And when it comes to modeling competence, we talk about the degree of coverage according to the modeling process, which part of the modeling process has the student really been working with, and how have they worked with the different aspects of the modeling processes involved in the cycle. Technical level, according to which techniques and mathematical knowledge and methods they have used for setting up and analyzing the model, and radius of action depending on in which domains of situations they have been working with modeling, and in which domain they are able to activate their modeling competence. The next one, please. So we have 2 types of reflections related to modeling here, developed together with my colleague Kelsen, Tina of Kelsen, where we have identified reflections which are internal to the modeling process, meaning that it's related to the different sub-processes involved in the modeling. For example, the assumptions made, the databases for estimating parameters, the ways of systematizing the problem situation, ways of dealing with the mathematical system, analyzing and interpreting the results, and also validating the whole modeling process. And then as something completely different, we identify also reflections and critique, which are external with respect to the modeling process. The next one, please. And to be specific about that, it has, here we have what I already said about the internal reflection. So I think we can go on to the next one. And here we have the external reflections, and one can identify different types, 4 different types of general types of external reflections related to the transformation of the original problem when it's made subject to a modeling process, the change of discourse about the problem when it relates to the use of a modeling, the delimitation of solutions considered to be those that can actually be evaluated in the model, and the delimitation of the group of people who can take part in the discourse, the critical base, you can say, that can have a say about the basis for decision related to the model. Please, the next one. So it's depicted here in 2 different contexts. We have the context of modeling, where the model is under development and it's still object of critique, and it could be developed further, it could be changed. And then at a certain time or in a certain situation, the model is transformed over to the context of application, where the model are used to create a basis for decision or understanding of some kind of technological or societal issue. And there are, of course, different types of interest related in these different types of situation. And it's completely a different type of reflections that are relevant in these 2 different contexts. The next one. Yeah, so modeling in epidemiology is indispensable for this type of research. It's an interdisciplinary area in which modeling really is in the very core of the activity, as you can see here. And in that sense, epidemiology is exemplary for the interdisciplinary interplay with mathematical modeling and for applications of modeling, of models in societal decision-making for health policies and that kind. Yes, the next one. And of course, the COVID-19 situation is very clear and actual example of that type of modeling, that type of applications of mathematical model. Here we have our Minister of Health explaining how, from a mathematical modeling point of view, one can understand what we really want to do in terms of the restriction installed in Denmark in order to change the curve of the number of infections to be below the threshold for the healthcare system. The next one, please. Yeah, and this is, so now I will have a look into what is really going on in modeling in epidemiology, and how can we think about the ways that students can start with analyzing a simple model, modeling infectious diseases such as influenza and COVID-19. And the basis for this is, of course, a knowledge about the cause of infection in terms of the medical, the clinical aspects, and in terms of the infectious status of people. So please, the next one. And I'm sure you are well familiar with the SER model. And here the idea is to explain and give examples of how analyzing this simple model, it's not very simple, but it's also not that complicated, but starting from the mathematical system, students in these projects can analyze the assumption behind the model by transfer the system of ordinary differential equation back to a compartment diagram, understanding what is really assumed about the homogeneity of the 3 different types of people according to their infectious status, if they are susceptible, infectious, or recovered, immune. And then from that, they can work on ways of developing the model so as it can be used to investigate what they're interested in the different projects. Please, the next one. Yeah, and the next one, I think this one is well known. It's simply the solution curves for, and here we have a case where you can see that in this, it's a very exemplary case for how key notions in epidemiology, such as the reproduction number, is defined by means and through this model, this ACR model. It's very clear intuitively that the reproduction number, meaning that C, which is the number of effective contacts in the population according to that particular disease, times 1 over V, which is the recovery rate, and which is the same of the average time of retention in the compartment of infections. That means the time that you can really transmit the disease. This expression, if that is below 1, then there will be no epidemic. If it's over 1, then we will have an epidemic. So that's very clear, but it's also, yeah, very important to really pinpoint the basis for this definition. And the next one, please. Yeah, here we have a curve in the phase diagram showing a solution curve for this model. We could take the next one. And from that, it's possible to define the critical immunization threshold, which could be reached through a vaccination program, for example, or through the fact that enough people have gone through the infection and have developed immunity in a natural way. The next one, please. Yeah, and here we have some examples of how projects have developed from this very simple model. The students who work in groups of typically 3 to 5 students for quite a long term, 1 semester, half of their study time. So it's a very substantial part of their program that they are doing these projects. And here we have an example where a group of students develop a model based on the ACR model, but including the fact that we have returning epidemics or pandemics of influenza due to mutations, due to antigeneric drifts, mutations, or shift when new genes are introduced, for example, by influenza virus from birds or other animals. And they model how this causes a loss of immunity and create a model where there was also taking into account that there will be new people born into the population and balanced with some death rate. Yes, please, the next one. So that's, yeah, the next one. This is about a Danish policy of influenza, which have as its core that older people should be offered vaccine against for free against influenza each year. However, it's not necessarily the most effective thing to do, since you can have much larger impact on the number of lost work days if you give the vaccine to the younger people and still nearly the same protection for the old one. So we need to shift quite a few slides to go down to the summing up. So you have to shift. Yeah, you need to shift along. Yeah, so progress in terms of modeling competence within epidemiology can be described according to the degree of coverage, in the way that it's possible to start by analyzing the simple model, the SER model, and go from the mathematical representation, the mathematical system, the ordinary differential equations, and coming back to a compartment model and analyzing the assumption behind and try to questioning what is really, what do you need to change if this model should be applicable for other type of problem. So yeah, so this is exemplary for the interplay between assumptions made in the modeling process and the available data and the medical knowledge about the disease that are modeled. Please, the next one. Yeah, and the technical level, it's clear that in this area is a very nice area for as an exemplary area for modeling dynamical systems by means of compartment diagrams and differential equations. The principle of for each compartment variable, the net rate of change is equal to the inflows minus the outflows, and that yields a system of ordinary differential equations, and that can be analyzed by means of mathematics, of course, analytically sometimes, but always also in terms of numerical analysis. And yeah, so the next one, please. Yeah, and that's yeah, the radius of action. It is quite obvious that developing from working with modeling in epidemiology, you can gradually expand the situations in which you can model dynamical systems by means of compartment modeling and differential equations. The next one. Yeah, and the progress in reflection. It relates clearly to the modeling process, the assumption of homogeneity in the compartments in terms of all people are acting and reacting medically in the same way according to the disease. That's of course a very rough assumption, and it's of course not correct, but you need to make it if you should be able to use modeling at all to investigate these situations. The next one, please. Yeah, I think that's also fine. We can. That's the last one, and here it's clear that working with these cases of epidemiological problems, it's completely clear for the students that they need to reflect not only about the modeling process and what is going on in the modeling process, but also about ways in which the modeling results are used in order to inform societal decision-making in relation to these issues. And it's a very important thing that it needs to be communicated to the public what is really the mathematical modeling, what is the mathematical modeling able to provide us with, and what needs to be based on political decisions. And that's really a very hot topic in terms of COVID-19. So
thank you, Morten, very much. And now it's my pleasure to introduce Professor Thomas Jesteland, the current director of Matric, the Center for Research, Innovation and Coordination of Mathematics Teaching at the University of Agder, who will lead the panel discussion. Thomas, over to you, please.
Thank you. Am I unmuted and you can hear me? Good. Let me see, can I also have the control? Or is it? We are going to have a 25-minute of panel discussion. Let me see. No, yeah, oh, sorry. I am still controlling it. Let me see if I do it correctly. Oh, now I'm controlling it. Thank you. Sorry. We are going to have 25 minutes. We're going to finish 5 to the hour. And I would like to welcome Morten. You can stay with us further on. And we also will have Stephanie and Lucas, which has presented earlier today. And I will also invite Natasha Bauer from the University of Amsterdam to be in the panel. She is at the Faculty of Science, isn't it, at the University of Amsterdam, and also part of the Platinum team. And we are going straight on to have discussions following up these talks, and I see you all there in the image, so please give me a notice if you would like to give an answer. And the first question goes directly, I guess, to what you just have been talking about, Morten. How do we assess these competences? Yeah. Because we cannot use the traditional exam. Would you like to following up?
Yes, I would very much like so to do so. Yeah, in what I just talked about, our project-based, problem-oriented project work, the groups are writing together a report which is made object of an exam, an oral group exam. But of course, I realize that that's a very special way of organizing a bachelor program to have that type of exam. But in that type of exam, there's no problem. It's really onto the point, because the students are examined in the modeling process that they have reported in the project report. But it's possible to do other things. It's possible to let students do smaller projects and mini projects running over 1 week or so, and then to have an oral examination based on there could be drawn a lot about which mini project they should be examined in, but then they could start by explaining what they have done in the mini project, and then from that the exam could take go into examine also the modeling techniques and the mathematical issues dealt with in that particular course. So it's possible, but it's difficult in traditional written examinations.
Can I just ask, how many students do you have in this bachelor program where you have modeling in the mathematics? Because typical first year mathematics classes are big.
Yeah, it was around 100 students per year, and it was a bachelor program, a 3-year bachelor program.
Is there anyone other who wants to give a comment on how to assess students? Yes, Stephanie.
Well, I'm drawing on experience at Loughborough University Maths Department in a 4th year course where they're doing, I think it's called communicating mathematics, and students have to present. So the presentation is marked in place of an exam. That group is about 30 to 50 students. I mean, 100 is more of a challenge. So you would have to split them up, maybe even do them as group presentations, and everybody gets the same mark. There's also the possibility with this peer element assessment. This is some software where you can students give each other marks depending on contribution. There's a peer element in their mark, and then the teacher assesses the final presentation. I've never used it, but obviously both in kind of open tasks like that, it seems to be reasonable to use something like that.
Thank you. Lucas.
Yeah, I just only wanted to comment on Stephanie's talk that peer review of students when collaborating on long-term project is, from my point of view, is very important, because you cannot expect that all the members of the group will contribute to the project in the same way. And sometimes some members are a bit disappointed or disadvantaged that they need to do more in order to finish the project and to be accepted by a teacher. So this is one opportunity how to check whether the students contribute well, and the other one is of course that a teacher should be a guide to these teams and try to monitor their activity and try to be just next to them and help them in case they are stuck.
Thank you. I see, Natasha, you unmuted yourself. Yeah, please.
May I also add some comment? I liked all these solutions that were told. I agree that this is how you do. Sometimes we have also a shorter time for an inquiry task, and then maybe this is not possible. So I think that it was also mentioned in the presentation of Blomrey that reflection is what students can do, and we could more stimulate that and maybe even assess somehow their reflections in order to help students to improve these competencies. So then you have maybe that formative and summative assessment come closer together to each other and also in the shorter tasks.
I was going to add that I think if you're thinking of using an alternative assessment, then start small and draw on experience of people who have used it. I mean, I would not do it with my 150 students without help, you know, just to manage the process. But if you have a relatively small group, you could make an attempt at, you know, introducing a different kind of assessment slowly and learn from that experience.
Thank you. I'll give the word to Morten, and then we're moving on for the next question afterwards. Yeah.
Yeah, I will just add that it's also possible to do a more what you can call a atomistic approach to modeling. So working with some of the sub processes, for example, mathematization, in more traditional written task, and ask the students to reflect about the assumptions that they need to do in order to mathematize a already well systematized situation. And by that, and you can also do that with the other parts of the modeling process. But I will emphasize that if you want to develop modeling competency as such, you also need at least sometimes and sufficiently often to work with the whole modeling process. But
yeah, thank you. Moving on, maybe this is a little bit related to what you just said. Oh, sorry, now I clicked the wrong button again. There we're back. Next question, how can we support the students' development of modeling competence through inquiry-based activities? Are the students only focused towards the exam, or can we design some inquiry task for modeling? Yeah, you're nodding, Morten.
But I will also leave it up to others to start if there are.
Yeah, please go ahead, Morten.
Say something. Yeah, I think the clue here is to distinguish between if you are using modeling as a tool for inquiring a problem situation outside mathematics. If you really are engaged with a problem which is stated outside in an extra mathematical language and situation, then you need modeling to do the inquiry, to inquire the situation, and that's and I think that type of situations can be captured in tasks that are more handleable in traditional teaching and also in traditional forms of examination. That's applied. We know that category, that's applied mathematics. but with the emphasis of challenging the students' reflections about what they are doing. Yeah.
Is it also more fun for the students to ask those why questions instead of just learning procedures? Is that do you have any experience that students like the inquiry? And
I think it's very fine to look for not very well founded examples of use of mathematical models, and there's a lot of them where you describe a tendency, for example, by using a model which takes explicitly into account the time, which is not an autonomous system, but you're taking into account the time. So you are making a descriptive model, but you claim that the model is in a way representing the mechanism behind some phenomena. It could be some kind of population growth or something. And then you can simply ask the students, or if you, for example, you can ask the students, what will happen if you extend the period? If after 100 years, what will happen, and what will you, how will you react on this, and what would you do about this situation? And
thank you. Yes, I'm going to change a little bit topic here now, because this was a lot about modeling, and now we're going to think. We also had a talk today about making universal design for all our classes, and as we heard today, we should not make this on demand at a very short notice. We should prepare it in advance. But the question is, have you experienced, or can you think of a situation when universal design preparations are not enough and you had to provide students with individual support on demand at a short notice? Do you have some experience? Yeah.
Yes, of course, this has happened in the past. I mean, Loughborough University, and I was going to add something earlier, is quite ahead in having actually a dedicated team who deals with students with disabilities, and have had for many years. And this is not the case in other universities. And actually, one of the surveys of the Platinum partners has shown that this provision is not usual everywhere, far from it. So despite us having this centre that informs us of students coming in, there are sometimes students coming in that we didn't expect with the kind of disability they had. And we were caught on having to adjust lecture notes at short notice. It's just that communications take a long time in universities, they're not very quick. And it also depends how much the student divulges, if they already have an identified need. And some of our students are identified when they're at the university, and that is like a 4 months process. So then the information comes suddenly sometime. I mean, I had an adjustment for a student like 2 weeks ago, and we are now in exam period. But that student will be able to have that adjustment for the exam. So even though it's only 2 weeks. So it does happen by the nature of how needs are identified for us. But, you know, some of the things we should start making small steps and not just present everything the same way. And I mean, one of the presentations from Lukáš did really show that, you know, some students like one thing, the others don't. And actually, in my experience, students with dyslexia and students with Asperger's or autism spectrum disorder are on completely opposite ends. What I do for the one student is very much not what the other one wants. So you have to be a bit flexible and not do the same thing all the time, not always use bullet points, change it a little bit, you know, because other people will like it too. So it makes it a bit more varied.
Thank you. Yeah, Lukáš.
Maybe Natasha would like to add. I have, of course, something to speak about. There are a lot. I have experienced a lot of situations when universal design is not enough, and namely accessibility of resources when they are full of graphics or full of mathematical symbols. It is an issue for students with visual impairment, for blind students. because they work with such material in a different way. They have to substitute their vision by another senses like touch or hearing. So that's why it is necessary to adjust the material so that they can use it and you can work with it properly. Another issue is working with specialized software. I mentioned that during my presentation, that it's an issue not only for students with visual impairment, but also for students with physical disability. Then manipulating with some instruments in laboratories, it can be a challenge for students who have some impairment of upper limbs, so that they may need an assistant to manipulate the instrument in a proper way. And one more example is, for example, communication during some discussions. It is very difficult to follow when you are a user of sign language interpreting or speech-to-text transcribing, which is normally a bit delayed 3 or 4 seconds after what was spoken. So these situations are very challenging, but I wanted to add one note. If you follow recommendations of universal design, then these accommodations, individual accommodations, are much easier to establish.
Thank you.
That's my experience.
Okay. Natasha, yeah, please.
Yeah, just a short example. I agree, of course, what Lucas said. Just I would like to tell that we had a student with a very strong visual problem, and she had their own solution for. So we had, when we have a normal exam for all students, digital exam in the large examination room, for this student who would also have a much longer time, and needed this special equipment to be able to do the exam, we have organized the exam for her at home. And she could do that exam by using proctoring, and we were very. I think it was a good solution for her, using also her own solution. So universal design that we had was not enough, but this way it was enough.
Thank you. Moving over to inquiry and community of inquiry, as we had in the first talks today. What do you think is most challenging in developing a community of inquiry? Well, yeah, Lucas, would you like to? Or
I think Simon gave a nice example.
Mm-hmm.
The most challenging is to establish the community of inquiry, to find some people interested.
Only the first step.
Yeah, the first step is, and then it comes easier and easier, because if people are on the same wave and they want to change their seminars and lectures, and they are enthusiastic, then everything is much easier. Except the first step. So for me is that it is most challenging to find somebody who will collaborate with you in this development.
Can I ask you, Morten, how you started your modeling class? Because that is not a typically mathematics class. And I guess that must be in a community which started this and not a single person.
Yeah, but it comes back to the foundation of Roskilde University and Project University. Yeah. And so it was, and part of the idea was to have an interdisciplinary natural science bachelor program. And in that design, mathematics, of course, need to ask itself as a subject, how can we contribute to this program? And one main idea was to do that in terms of teaching modeling in courses. Of course, we also have to teach normal mathematics in terms of linear algebra and calculus and analysis and that and all the subjects, but to emphasize the modeling aspects of mathematics, and there have been a long development, so I can't go into the details, but I would say that what really makes a difference for the work that I have been engaged in was the fact that we were a couple of colleagues who had the shared responsibility of developing and teaching a modeling course. That was really because then it was possible for us to engage and try to think about how can we really develop this course, and then of course it was also a nice thing that two of us worked within research and math education, so we could make it also a part of our own research to develop the course. So that's.
It's the thing you're saying here now. It's also important to have the management of the department or the faculty involved to say that it's not one person who is responsible for this class, but it's the community who is responsible, and you need the management to say that. Yeah, Natasha.
We always at the University of Amsterdam, we work with lecturers teams, and actually lecturers and teaching assistants teams, and in our case, when we were working with inquiry-based mathematics, our community of inquiry was the team that was involved in the development and giving that course. So it was normal to meet. And it was also very, very useful to meet and talk about how teaching was going and how development and what we need to change. Well, it is still a challenge to organize this because teaching about how you teach is not something self-evident in education, but I would very much recommend to do this in every course. Doesn't matter, is it an inquiry-based mathematics in it or modeling or not. This is necessary for all courses, that lecturer teams has regular meetings during the before start, during and after start, and that the whole process of teaching is has also the part of the reflection.
Thank you. We'll bring that into. We have a final question, I think, before we are turning the word back to Yuri, and we have 2 minutes to answer this question. And this is bringing the teaching assistant in, as you mentioned, Natasha. Suppose there are teaching assistants that already have been involved in inquiry-based mathematics education.
May I? Yeah.
Yeah, please, you can just answer right away.
Yeah, I didn't answer it with an example what happened here. So in our case, we had the teaching assistants who were 1 year before they were themselves teachers, students. And when they become teaching assistants, they was easier for them to teach students because they understood better what their problems were. But they also helped us. They were co-creators of new material because they knew how these materials should be more adapted to the needs of the students, and they helped actually without knowing this rule that Stephanie has shown us. They have organized part of the material in that way, simplifying the tasks. And so it would be also good that the learning community, the community of inquiry, learns together and get also a step further.
Thank you. I think we will leave it there, and we are heading towards 5 to the hour. Thank you so much for joining this discussion. Morten, Lucas, Stephanie, and Natasha, thank you. And now I'll give the word back to you, Dave.
Thank you, Thomas, for a good organization of the panel discussion. And now I would like to give the floor to Yuri Rogovchenko for concluding remarks. Yuri?
Right. I still see slides remaining. So I'm not sure this is what I wanted to show. But anyway, I would like to say that it was a very intense and very interesting event, as we usually have for Platinum Team. And whatever we plan and how good we are in doing this, we still have not enough time for answering all the questions and responding to the demand of all the participants. So summarizing what we were doing today, I would like to say that, first of all, one of the themes we were discussing is formation of communities of inquiry by university teachers. And here I think we have witnessed two very interesting presentations. Barbara, who is the academic leader of the project, she was explaining in more detail our three-layer model, which is the foundation for the whole project. Simon, on the other hand, made a very interesting encyclopedic, like a primer of inquiry for those who want to start engaging personally in inquiry in mathematics education. And I think it was a very useful presentation for us as well. Then we had also a very, very useful presentation from our Platinum members, from Stephanie and Lukasz. They were talking about students with special needs. And when you start reflecting on this, you can sometimes catch yourself that you really don't know what to do and how to do. There are so many questions. This was also reflected in the questions we received for the presenters. So it's so much unknown and really important. But one of the most important messages is, again, as Simon mentioned, we need to start with making small steps, and we need to be attentive to the detail. We need to check how can we help our students to learn better? How can we share the responsibilities for learning with the community? Tomorrow, much of the discussions will be about mathematical modeling. So we will have two invited presentations in the morning, just addressing mathematical modeling. And the last presentation, keynote by Morten Blomhøj, was really a very good bridge from today's webinar day 1 to tomorrow's day 2. So I would really very much encourage all the participants today to spread the word and come tomorrow to join us. And I thank you all the presenters for the effort they made to present here very interesting material for us to reflect on. I would like to thank all the participants who joined us for this discussion today, and I hope you will be getting back to us tomorrow. So thank you all very much. Thank you, the team in Kyiv, which made this webinar happen, for technical assistance. And if it had sometimes certain minimal troubles, it just shows that we are natural, live, and we are open to you with all our things we wish to share, including the, say, temporarily difficult instances we also face. So we hope to see you all tomorrow. Thank you very much for being with us. And that's all from me for today. Thank you.